10, 9, ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
Welcome to part 12 of our video series highlighting the 1/100th scale Saturn V kit from Estes. We're in the home stretch now. In this installment, we'll be continuing our airbrush painting, moving up to the second to third stage transition, as well as painting the circumferential band and details onto the lower third stage. After all of that is complete, we'll move back down the rocket to the base of the lower section to paint the silver sections on the fins and fin fairings. I need to begin with a mea culpa as I've discovered a mistake in assembly. The third stage wrap is misaligned with the transition wrap below, and that's because I failed to do the appropriate research before installation. These two details are called RCS modules. That acronym stands for Reaction Control System. These were installed on the base of the third stage of the Saturn V to provide attitude control when the time came for the TLI burn, the event that would allow the Apollo missions to leave Earth orbit for the moon. On our model, the RCS module closest to the two cable raceways should be aligned with the seam in the transition wrap below. My mistake was to install the third stage wrap with the seam in line with the transition seam. That's on me, and you shouldn't do that. Just for grins, I grabbed the Saturn V that my daughter built and painted over a decade ago when she was 11, and guess what? She got this exactly right. I attribute this to the remarkable parenting skills that my wife and I share. Now, the impact of this is that our third stage wrap is about 15 degrees out of phase with the transition. It's not a fatal error, but I will always know that it's there. I'm sure I can work it out in therapy someday. So what do? What we're going to do is what is least wrong and most right. As I see it, there are essentially two ways to proceed at this point. The first would be to put the paint demarcation lines in line with the RCS quads. The challenge there is that these ullage motor covers would be in the wrong space. The other option is to correctly place the ullage motors in the center of each field appropriately. That's the way I've decided to go. Now that we have a solution, we're going to place a line of this 2.5 millimeter masking tape just above the join line between the transition wrap and the lower third stage wrap. I'm going to slide a number 11 knife blade through some of the seam areas just to clean that up a little bit and help seat the tape a little bit better. Okay, we'll back that up with some wider Tamiya tape. Next, we'll use some inexpensive painter's tape to apply an overspray mask. Next, we'll mask and paint the transition section. Like we did on the roll patterns on the lower first stage, we're going to mask and paint one quadrant at a time, to reduce the possibility for mayhem. Let's go ahead and begin masking the quadrants on the transition section. You'll notice here I have the template we cut out some time ago, and we still have the masking on the shoulder of the transition section from when we painted the white coat onto this unit. I've also made some notes on here, so this is going to go very quickly. Because we've masked all of this, it's difficult to make out where the details are. So I've gone ahead and marked both of the RCS modules and the long and short cable raceways. I'm going to drop the template into place. You'll notice I've already got cheat marks here. I'm going to tape this into place so that it doesn't wiggle around on us. And you'll notice that each quadrant is marked as to how that area on the transition should be painted. This section right here will be entirely black. This section, the upper section, will be black. This section, the lower section, will be black. And this section will be entirely white. We're going to begin with the section that will be entirely black because it's the easiest to mask. This side is easy to determine because it's also the seam in the transition wrap. This side is a little tougher, but not tough at all, really. We will put a piece of masking tape down as a guide right along the top of one of the corrugations, in line with this mark on the template. We can go ahead and remove the template. Remember, we're doing one part of the transition at a time. A strip of 10mm Tamiya tape is applied as close to the transition seam as we can get, right along the top of a corrugation. This side, we're also going straight down the middle of a corrugation. I'll move that guide strip out of the way. Okay, we'll put some overspray masks in place and we'll begin painting. With the overspray masks in place, we'll take just a minute to burnish everything down one more time. I've got my trusty skewer here. This was a relatively simple mask job, as we didn't have to go over the corrugations. We had the convenience of going straight down a corrugation. Again, we're spraying Tamiya NATO black acrylic here. And you'll also notice that the ullage motor in the center of this panel has been masked off in a diamond formation. Let's go ahead and unmask this panel. I'm going to be very careful not to disturb the masking on the third stage portion of this component. And that quadrant is perfect. I forgot that I need to tease off this central masking on the ullage motor. After I filmed this, I did a bit more research on these features on the interstage. These are actually not ullage motors. Instead, they are retro rockets. Their job is very similar, though. They are designed to fire and provide a retrograde motion to help separate the second stage from the third stage. That turned out meh. That may need some touch-up with a paintbrush. We'll let this settle down and then move on to the next two sections. I've dropped the template back onto the assembly and lightly taped it into place. We have two more areas we need to paint. This quadrant, the upper section is black. This quadrant, the lower section is black. In all of these cases, the mask line is going to go through the center of those retro rocket motors we just discussed. So how do we cut a piece of tape with the appropriate curve on there? Well, we can use a tool called a shroud calculator. A shroud calculator is a tool that has calculations buried into it that helps define the radius and angle that one would need to cut in order to create a simple shroud, not unlike this entire assembly here. It's a whole discussion into itself. I should probably do an entire video on the subject. What I will tell you is that I've done that math already and determined that the radius of the line we need to cut is 6.43 inches, which will yield the appropriate curve on our masking tape. Here's how we're going to do this. I've put a couple of pieces of masking tape, the good Tamiya tape, onto this translucent cutting mat, and I'm going to lay this over that. And to make sure that we've got everything lined up, I'm going to use a light table. Now, a light table is exactly what it sounds like. It is an illuminated platform onto which you can set things such as this. I don't know how well this shows up on camera, but I can see the tape below this line. I'm going to double check alignment here, and then I am going to cut through the template into the tape below. Now, not everyone has a light table laying around. Another way you could do this would be to place all of this up against a window on a bright sunny day. Another solution would be to simply tape the template over the tape and cut it without any type of back illumination. And there, we've cut through that tape. And I now have two pieces of tape that have the appropriate curvature on them. Okay, we have our template in place. Just off camera, we have our cut masking tape in place. And we are going to mask off the area on the side opposite that we've already painted. The tape is going up here, which means the lower section of this quadrant will be painted. I've also got tweezers, an X-Acto knife, and our trusty skewer at the ready. Let's get started. I'm going to lay the tape in place very loosely at first. That's because we're going to need to work it down into the corrugations. We'll start from the middle and use our skewer. I think I'm going to cut the middle just to release the pressure on that. Okay, the first bit of tape is in place. I'm going to take the template off, and then we'll put the vertical tapes in place. We've got a couple cheat marks in place already. I'm going to run this tape straight up the top of the corrugation closest to that mark. Here's our other cheat mark. I'll back this up with some additional tape. Next, I'll finish off this retro motor housing, and then we'll put some overspray masks in place. We're almost ready to paint. We're going to take a moment to burnish down all of our tape lines, especially in these corrugations. You'll also notice that I've masked off the retro rocket housing in the center of this quad. And we're ready to paint. Our paint has had some time to settle down, so let's go ahead and begin pulling the masking off. I'll start with the overspray mask. I'm going to bring in a towel to set this on. I don't want to damage the paint on the underside. Beautiful. Our next task will be to connect these two quadrants with the upper black section here. We have our template back in place and our curved tape ready to go. What I'm going to do is put some small pieces of tape just above this template to help guide the application of the tape. Our guide tapes are in place. We'll remove the template. And we can begin gently placing our curved tape in place. I'll do this very loosely. And I'll cut it in the middle to release some of the pressure on it. And then working from the middle, I'll begin working everything down into the corrugations. Next, we'll use some 18mm tape over the top of this corrugation. And the tape is in place. Next, we need to cut a custom piece of tape to cover this retro motor. Next, we'll add an overspray mask to this and be ready to paint. Okay, we have our overspray mask in place. The airbrush is prepped and ready to go. Before we start spraying, I'm going to take a moment to just burnish these tape lines down one more time. We don't want any bleed under these tape lines. Note that the airbrush is being pointed perpendicularly, is that a word? At the surface of the model. That'll also help reduce the possibility of any bleed through. That looks great. We'll let that settle down a bit before we remove the masking. Let's pop our masking off and see how it looks. Tried to roll away from me there. Okay, that looks really good. I'm very pleased with that. There's a few little scratches and hickeys that I'll need to touch up with a brush, but that won't be hard to do at all. Our next job is to paint a circumferential band around the forward end of our third stage. This is a really interesting portion of the Saturn V. The upper section here, above the corrugations, represents a system called the Instrumentation Unit, or IU. It was built by IBM rather than a traditional aerospace firm and was a ring 36 inches tall. It was essentially the brain of the Saturn V and contained elements such as the guidance system and the associated gyroscopes, power, range safety, telemetry, and even a whopper of an air conditioning system to keep that early tech cool. Today, most of those functions could be replicated using the phone in your pocket, but for the 60s it was pretty revolutionary. The kit instructions call for the black strip to extend from the forward end of the assembly aft 1 inch. We're going to be a bit more precise than that. Taking a look at the third stage and IU drawings in the Space in Miniature monograph that we introduced back in the first episode of this series, we can see that that stripe extends aft to a point just below the telemetry antenna details on the third stage. Those details are replicated on our model, so that's what we'll do. The drawing also tells us that the forward end of the large cable raceway should also be painted black. We'll begin and end our stripe there, then mask that independently. I've just done a test here. If we use 18mm tape for this mask job and line up the bottom edge of that tape with the bottom edge of the corrugation wrap, we will end up with a perfectly sized gap between the top edge of the tape and the telemetry antennas. One of our challenges here is that we are masking over corrugations. So I'm going to start the tape and right away start working the tape down into the corrugations. We've hit the small cable raceway here, so I'm going to cut around that to release some of this pressure. We didn't end up quite straight there, so I may correct that with some 6mm tape. I think the reason is we started to take a bit of a turn here because of the short cable raceway detail. So I think what I'm going to do actually is cut this off here and start it with a shorter or less wide piece of tape at this point. We'll bring in some 6mm tape and start from this side. We'll anchor it over the long cable raceway and bring it back this way. Much, much better. With this masking in place, the base of our circumferential stripe is done. There's a bit more complexity to the forward end of the IU in the third stage though. Let's take a look at this footage of the launch of Apollo 11 and we'll freeze on our stripe right there. Note that the telemetry antennas are white. There are 4 of them around the assembly. Those will be easy to mask off using small squares of tape. Also, notice the large white field on the right of the instrumentation unit just below the lunar module adapter. That will also be easy to mask and paint. Next, let's take a look at the opposite side of the rocket as captured via this famous montage by Life magazine photographer Ralph Morse. Here we can see a large field at the bottom of the stripe right next to the long cable raceway, as well as more telemetry antennas. We can also pick out some rust brown color on some of the other antennas. Replicating all of this will be easy and fun to do. Let's start masking off some of these details. I'll start here, just to the left of this long cable raceway. Now, the first thought is we could just put a piece of tape down. The challenge there is that the raised dimension of this telemetry antenna will distort how that tape lays on the surface of the model. The other challenge is that we need to account for the corrugations. We need to be able to push the tape down into the corrugations. So what I've done is draw up a pattern in Adobe Illustrator to cut out a piece of tape to fit over that allows for a window for the telemetry antenna to peek through. We can then cover the telemetry antenna independently. I draw these up in Adobe Illustrator. I often tell people my #1 modeling tool is Adobe Illustrator. Maybe I'll do a video on that someday. Let's get started. Let's cut this out. I've done extras because I always like to have extras. You can draw up something very simple in PowerPoint or Word, probably in Photoshop. Inkscape is another possibility. Okay, I'm going to cut the window out first. Next, we're going to tape the template onto some tape with some more tape. It's like tape inception. I'll cut that out. Now I'm going to cut from the center out, something I should have done on the last bit. Always cut any internal bits out first, regardless of what the material is. If you were cutting a balsa fin, for instance, you'd do it from the inside out. Now I'll use the straight edge on the outside edges. First thing I'll do is pull up the template. We now have a perfect bit of masking tape that will fit perfectly where we need it. We'll need to work the tape down into the corrugations as we go. Now I'll just take a small piece of tape and place it over the telemetry antenna. I've made another template for the tape that will cover the telemetry antennas, and I've made enough here to make plenty of mistakes. Just as an FYI, these little rectangles are 5 millimeters high and 4 millimeters wide. I think I'm going to redo this one. This is why it's always a good idea to make extra of anything you make. Looks good so far. There's a few other bits and bobs we'll mask off as well. There's an interesting detail on the Life magazine photo that appears to be right here, and it looks like a circular element with a vertical bit emerging from it. That'll be an interesting thing to add. Let me show you this tool here. This is a punch of some type. I've heard it variously described as a metal punch, a leather punch. I use it for styrene plastics for detailing models a great deal. You can also use it to punch holes in tape. I have a piece of tape here. I'm going to punch and press very hard and kind of tug the tape up out of the way and rip it out. That should leave us a very nice bit of tape on the pad, and it does. I'll just tease up the edge of that, grab it with my tweezers, and drop that into place on our model. Easy peasy. I also have, just off camera, a small bit of tape for the vertical element. And that is ready to go. Our next white masked area will extend from the top of the corrugations forward to the right of this telemetry antenna. Now in the middle of this area, we've got some details which are going to be difficult to mask over. So I've cut another piece of tape off screen. You've already seen how we do it, and I'll be placing that there now. Okay, we're going to place the bottom edge of this along the top of the corrugations. Next, we'll cover up that detail in the middle. This is going to require another small piece of tape. And even one more piece of tape. Okay, we're almost ready to spray some black paint. I'll put an overspray mask in up to this point and get the airbrush ready. Our airbrush is running, and I'm going to take a moment to just burnish all of our edges one more time, making sure that all the tape is seated down in the corrugations. Okay, we're ready to spray. Again, this is our trusty NATO black acrylic. Lots of light coats. Note that I'm holding the brush perpendicular to the surface of the model. That's the best way to avoid any bleed through. Okay, that took several coats, but it looks fantastic. We'll let it settle down and take the masking off. Okay, let's take this masking off and see how things turned out. I am very pleased at how all of this has turned out. Now that the paint up here has had an opportunity to settle down a bit, we're going to turn our attention back down here. These, again, are the reaction control system modules. They have this triangular tip on the front, and again, they're used to maneuver the third stage while it's in orbit prior to the translunar injection burn. We're going to mask these off and paint them silver using the same process we used on the fins. We're going to do a layer of black and then the silver over that. Let's get started. I'll start with a couple of pieces of the very narrow tape that we used earlier. I should mention that elements of this video are being shot out of sequence. We'll get into a deeper discussion of why we're painting the silver over black a little bit later when we work on the fin fairings. And there, our masking is in place. Next step is to paint. Okay, our airbrush is ready. I'm just going to go around the tape edges one more time. Again, we're starting with the black. And that should be plenty. Let's do the other side. This is going to be tricky. I'm going to have to hold it up. There we go. I don't want to set the wet side down. And I accidentally put my finger into the other side. Don't do that. Okay, we'll let this settle down for a few minutes and I'll reload the brush with silver paint. So I forgot to hit record when I started spraying the silver. I apologize for that. I'll just finish it up here. We'll let that settle down for a while and unmask it. Let's go ahead and remove our masking. Beautiful. I am very pleased with that. Let's do the other side. And this side looks great too. We're almost done with this portion of our model. Now, one of the things that really intrigued me about the Life magazine photograph that we looked at earlier were the brown antennas up here at the forward end of the third stage and instrumentation unit. I'd really like to get that vibe on this model. So to do that, we're going to use some Brown Testors brush paint and just hit the tops of a few of these antennas. I'm going to pick the smallest antennas here. There. That just gives a little subtle hint of color there that I think will really set off this part of the model. We're going to move down to the aft end of the airframe and begin painting the aft bit of each fairing skirt as well as the fins with a metallic silver color. Now for masking these off, the kit provides us with a very simple and effective template. This template just fits in place on the aft end of the fairing and has a convenient notch cut out for the fin. I'll hold that in position and put a couple small pieces of tape on here to hold the template in place. That will give us some very convenient lines along which to mask the fairing. Let's get this turned around and we'll start by masking up the side of the fin. I'm going to cut one end of the tape as close to perpendicular as I can because two pieces of tape are going to meet and we need for that join to be as clean as possible. We'll bring our skewer in. I'll turn this around 180 degrees. We'll work on the other side. We'll need to mask right up here at the front. I'm going to place some tape right here at the base of the fairing that will eventually connect with an overspray mask. We'll do that on either side. We'll mask along here with 6mm tape. The reason is that we want some flexibility in the tape. I'll cut a clean edge along one end. And we'll begin placing this right along the template. Because it is a corrugated surface, we'll bring in our skewer. We'll work on the other side next. Next, we'll remove our template. I've placed some additional pieces of Tamiya tape around the fairing so we can attach an overspray mask. Remember, good Tamiya tape, whenever the tape touches the model, we can use inexpensive tape when we're attaching overspray masks to the tape itself. Let's go ahead and prep the overspray mask. I've got a simple shopping bag here. I'm going to put this cutting pad inside that, and then I'm going to cut a little window about 3 inches wide and 1 inch deep, and then extend that in the middle with a window for the fin. One piece of Tamiya tape here at the top, and then some inexpensive tape. I'll put a long overspray mask on the upper end of the airframe to catch any overspray that makes it that high, and anchor that in place with a single piece of tape. We have all of our masking in place, the overspray masks are in place, and we're ready to paint this silver. The next thing we need to do is to select a silver. I'll move this out of the way. Here are 3 candidate colors real quick. This first one is a titanium silver. I think it's a little too light. Here we have a metallic gray. I think it's predictably a little too dark. And that leaves us with this flat aluminum. I think this is going to be a great choice for this particular application. The next thing we need to do is discuss how we're going to put the paint on the model. You'll recall this service module from several episodes ago. We painted this black first and then sprayed silver lacquer over that. That gives us a very deep, dark silver color. I really like the effect. We're going to do the same thing with our acrylics. We're going to paint the fins and fairings black first using the NATO black, and then we're going to overspray that with the flat aluminum. Our airbrush is prepped and the compressor is running just off screen. I'm going to take a moment to use my skewer to make sure that all of our tape edges are down and secure. We don't want any overspray to damage anything at this point. Let's begin spraying our fin. I'll also paint this back crescent here and the underside of the fin. This doesn't need to be an exhaustive multi-coat effort. The black doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be there. The silver is going to do most of the work. Okay, I'll clean the airbrush. Our airbrush is reloaded with silver. I'm going to adjust the brush. I'll spray the bottom crescent now and the underside of the fin. This is going to look fantastic. Let's remove our overspray masks. I think I mentioned in an earlier episode, when you remove masking, try to pull it back against itself. In other words, don't pull it up away from the surface of the model, pull it back. Uh-oh, we've got a little bit of bleed through. And indeed, we do have the tiniest bit of bleed through right there. I was remiss in getting that tape really sealed down before we started painting, so that's on me. There's a quick and easy way to clean that up, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. Okay, I've zoomed in as much as I can here, and sure enough, we do have some leakage under the tape that showed up right along the corrugations. It looks like the black first layer is the culprit here. Now, because these are acrylics, they're very easy to clean up. What I'm going to do is take some Q-tips and some standard generic Windex glass cleaner to clean that up. Now, the interesting thing about our Q-tips is we're not going to use the fat fuzzy end to clean them. These are the type of Q-tips that have a fibrous paper core. What I'm going to do is cut that right in the middle at about a 45-degree angle. I'll do a couple of them. And what that does is give me a chisel tip that I can moisten in Windex to scrub those errors away. Now, off camera, I've moistened that end of the Q-tip. And I'm just gently going to scrub against the error. And sure enough, our mistake will come right off. Notice how the tip of the Q-tip, where it's cut there, gets dirty. That means it's working. It also means we're at the point where we should throw that away. I'll use the other end of the Q-tip to mop up some moisture there. And I'll get another cut Q-tip to continue. I should mention I am using magnification for this. The visor may peek into the frame a bit. I can't say enough about magnification. It makes a huge difference. Okay, that one is dirty enough. I'm going to throw it away. And again, just a couple of drops of Windex are all we need to moisten the end of this little chisel tool. See that paint that came up? I have a fresh one here. Again, moistened with just a couple of drops of Windex. I should also mention this only works with the acrylics. This technique won't work with lacquers. Okay, I'm going to declare that done. That's a pretty solid cleanup effort right there. We'll paint the remaining 3 fin and fairing assemblies off camera. And that brings us to the end of this installment. In our next episode, we'll be applying the decals to the model, my favorite part of scale modeling. Thanks for watching.